series for our Mitchell University. Today we're going to be working with SAP Business One, and we're going to be talking about the outgoing payments. This webinar is being recorded. It'll be available on our website, so you can visit us at www.mitchellgroup.com to view this plus the others in our training series. So let's begin, and let's talk about some concepts in SAP. We're going to be talking about banking. So within banking, SAP uses the concepts of incoming payments and outgoing payments. We normally refer to incoming payments as cash receipts and outgoing payments as like AP invoices or an AP check run and so on. SAP actually combines the outgoing payments, so it allows you to do outgoing payments to both customers and vendors. Another concept we talk about in SAP is called the business partner. So let's take a look at that real quick. In SAP, a business partner is considered a customer, a vendor, or a lead. So what we can do is we can do incoming and outgoing payments to both customers and vendors. So this is a nice functionality which built into SAP that other softwares do not allow. So if we have to do an outgoing check, let's say a refund to a customer, we can actually do it through the outgoing payments instead of having to actually create that customer as a vendor. So let's go in and look at some of the concepts. We're going to go here and we're going to look at outgoing payments. So here we have our outgoing payments. We're going to open this up, and here's our screen. So you can see by default we're doing outgoing payments for vendors, but you can do an outgoing payment for a customer. You can also do an outgoing payment for an account. This is something that allows you to actually do directly to a GL account, not affecting a specific vendor or customer, something miscellaneous, and you can actually put the name in here as well. If we select vendor and we do a tab or a search, we're going to see our vendors. If we select customer and we do that same tab or search, we're going to see our customers, and so on. So let's actually do a simple one. Let's go here to vendor, and let's just tab, and let's select a vendor. Let's just grab Acme Associates here, which is the first one on the list. Okay, and you can see some information here. Now, again, we know from the navigation lessons we've talked about, we can actually change what we see in this screen right here. We can actually go into our form settings. So I'm going to click here on the form settings. And in our table format, we can make certain things visible and active. So you can see here we have the document number, active. We have the customer reference number. We have the dates here, the due date. Here, this little asterisk indicates what is overdue. We're looking at the days of overdue and so on. So we have the total balance, and so on. So again, we can use this to actually, let's deselect these here so we can kind of clean up our screen. So again, we can see the document and the type of documents. These are AP invoices. We can also use that form setting to move things around. So let's just take the document type. I'm going to grab this, hold it, and we're going to put it under document number there. Again, you can see that. We know from working with SAP in our navigation lessons that we have these arrows, these drill downs or links. So here I can link and I can actually look into the business partner. So you can see here, here's the business partner. There's his account balance. If you want to look at, for example, his specific terms, you can see here how he's net 30 days and how everything's being taken care of. You can also do that here. Document 171, if I want to click on that. Again, here you can look at the actual document. So this would be an AP invoice. We're going to open up. And again, you can see the information. Notice that this one has a partial page. If you look down here, you can see the total of the document, the amount applied, and you can see this has a balance of $5,000. So we can see that here. Again, we can do discounts either by using a percentage. We can do a total discount, and this is the information we're going to pay. So what we do is we select the invoices we want to pay, and then we have to select what's known as the payment means. The payment means are how we're going to pay it. And we can do this two ways. We can actually do it here, or we can just right-click in the document and go to our payment means. So we have 4 ways to make a payment. We can do a check, and this will list the bank setup. So we would select our check. We can do a bank transfer. This would be a wire transfer. If we're using credit cards, we can define and make payments with credit cards, and we can do cash. This also works for the incoming payments kind of the same way. When I select a check, you can select the bank. Notice here that the check number is grayed out because we'll be selecting the check number when we actually go to print the checks. If you want to do a manual check, I would click here, and now I can enter my check number. This should be a handwritten check. So let's say that the invoice was already entered into SAP, and you had to handwrite the check for whatever reason, so you handwrote the check. You still have to enter that into the system, but you're going to flag it as manual, enter the check number here, and then this check will be posted into SAP, so we have the history of this manual check number 123, but it's not going to show up on the actual check runs or on the actual printing of checks because there's no reason to print it since it was a manual check. So let's look at a couple of samples really simple. So we're going to do one. We're going to leave it, here's the date. We're just going to leave everything today's date, but you can actually set your date. So if you want to set this up for Friday, you can go here. You can actually enter Friday as the date and the posting date if you want to do it on a Friday's type date or so on. You can see here we have the invoices we're going to select. So we're going to do a couple ones simple. We're just going to select this one. So we're going to pay the $5,000. We're going to right-click, payment means, and this one here, let's just do a check. Here's, again, the check information. Now what you can do is you can use your form settings here, again, to set up other information about the check. Let's just take off the endorsement and the primary here, and we'll leave the GL account. Another thing we can do there, since we selected it, we see the 5,000 here. Since we've done that, we can actually type the 5,000 in here, or we can right-click and say copy balance due. We click OK, and we click add. Again, once we get this message, since we're adding, we're basically posting. Once you add it, you're getting the message that you cannot change the document after you've added it. So if we add this and make a mistake, we'd have to actually cancel or reverse the outgoing payment. Okay, so we added it. Again, a simple example. Let's call it back up. Let's go up here to the last data record. Let's call it back up and take a look at it. So again, here you can see the information. You can see what was paid. Again, so now if we look at the document, you see that the document is paid in full. It's closed, and there's no balance due down here. Okay, we can go here and look at our transactions, our effective general ledger. So we're going to go click here, and you can see our effective general ledger. We credited the account here, the cash in the bank, and we debited our vendor. The AP gets debited internally because in SAP, the vendor and customers, the business partners we call them, have the control accounts built into the system. The control accounts are the accounts receivable and accounts payable. So if you look here, you can see that that's built in here. So this is your really link to general ledger. So that money is going to be sitting here in my general ledger. So if I go to general ledger and I scroll to the very last record, there's the 5,000, and you can see the outgoing payments. So what SAP does, it uses those control accounts to bring the information in. What's reflected in the journal entry is the actual vendor. So you see it here. So again, this is a debit to the vendor, which in turn is a debit to the accounts payable account that's built into the vendor. So it's actually set up that way. Okay, and again, credit to the bank. Now if I go to the payment means here, you can see it tracks the payment means. Again, you can see here that this is a check. There's no check number yet because we have not actually printed checks. Once we print checks, this check number will be assigned. But notice here I can't make any changes. So this is the way it is. So this is, again, nice functionality too, because if you go in and there's a problem and somebody calls and wants to know the check number, you have everything built into the system. Okay, so let's do another one. Let's go to add. Again, we're just going to tab, and we're going to pick the same vendor. So let's do a partial pay. So again, if we want to do, let's say here, we want to take this one here, we want to select it, and we want to make a partial pay. So all we do is the total payment. We would go here and put $5,000. All right, we do that. Again, we go right-click. We go to our payment means. Let's do this one as a bank transfer. Just going to put today's date. And again, we can do that right-click, copy balance due. So we don't have to type it again. Click OK and click Add. Again, we're going to get the message that once I add this, it's like posting. So once I add it, I can't make a change to it. So let's call it back up. So again, you see the information here. Again, if we right-click, look at the payment means. Again, we see that this is grayed out. I can't make any changes, but this is how I did it. And again, if you look at your effect in General Ledger, you have that same effect right here. Okay, and that holds true for the credit cards and so on. Again, very simple process. Let's look at some different stuff. Again, let's go here, and now we can work with discounts, because what we can do is we can do a discount either here or a total discount. Let's say, let's find that one with a. Let's say this one here. Okay, let's say when you got the money, they shorted you 3 cents. So what I want to do is, in the total discount, I want to put in 0.03. Right? I'm doing that because what I want to do is do a discount of the amount, 0.03, and let me change this here. So I got to change this to 60. That's what they paid me, and put it that way. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take my total discount and put the information in here. That way I can do that and actually kind of do a write-off. I can also do a discount percentage. So let's say I go here and you want to give a 10% discount. You can also do a 10% discount this way. All right, so we can do that way, and that's going to be the total payment. Again, we're going to right-click, go to the payment means. Let's do a check, and this is where the copy balance due comes in handy. I don't have to figure it out. And I'm going to add it. Again, if we go back and take a look at it, you look at our effect in General Ledger, you can see now we got that discount. So again, the same thing. We credited the bank, we credited the discount, and we affected the vendor, which in turn affected the accounts payable account. What you have to remember here, and a lot of people make this mistake, is you've got to do the payment as the amount. What happens in SAP, and I'll show you an example, and this will happen from time to time when people want to do a short pay. So they go here, and let's say this one, we're only paying $1,000. So normally you would put $1,000 here. If you leave it that way, and you do a right-click, and you do a payment means, and then here, let's do it here, and I go and I put my $1,000 here. What it's going to do, it's going to actually work, but it's going to kind of confuse SAP, and SAP has to create a negative journal entry in order to get it to go back, because what's happening is here you're telling SAP to pay in full. So you're telling SAP to pay of this invoice the full thing, the $1,600, but here you're only taking $1,000. So what SAP has to do, it says, well, you're paying the 16, you're only giving me 1,000. It has to create a negative to kind of add a negative, subtract a negative back. So it's going to subtract a negative and bring it back in. So let's just get that out of the bank charge. So watch what happens when I add that. You can see here, you get this information here. So it's getting confused because what it's doing, it's telling you, listen, you're selecting this amount, okay, but you've only put $1,000 in the payment. So it's trying to create a negative on account, like a reversal. So it's trying to do this weird thing here to do it. It will work, okay? But again, that's typical what happens with a lot of clients they call, but watch what it does. So now it shows the invoice paid in full when it really wasn't paid in full. So it closes the invoice instead of leaving it open. And what it's going to do is in the journal entry will be correct. See here, the 1,000, it did it right. So what it does now, if we look at the vendor, let's go to the account balance of the vendor and go to the last record. See, it creates this weird negative information in here. Let's take that off so we can see. Right here. See how it creates this weird negative transaction. So it will work. It will work, but it creates a weird type of transaction. So what you would normally do is do the short pay. So normally what we would do here, like we saw before, if you want to short pay it, you want to change the amount here. So again, this one, we're going to pay it, and if we're going to short pay it, we want to make sure we put the amount here and then put it on the other one. Now you notice that payment on account came up, all right? That, what that does is it allows me to kind of do an overpay or pay on account. So let's say, let's clear that and go back in. So let's say you get okay, again, you're gonna do a payment on account. You're gonna pay this, plus you want to do another payment on account. So you're gonna send, let's say $2,000, and there was only one invoice that you were paying. Again, purposes here, I have a lot of them, but so here you're going to do that. So you can either put the difference here, okay, but you'd have to figure it out on the calculator, or what you can do is, again, you can right-click, go to the payment means. Here, we're going to put $2,000. Okay, we're going to take the bank charge out because it's not really a bank charge because we want it to go on account. Okay, and we click Add, we're going to get this message. See, now it makes sense because now you're getting the positive amount. Remember, when you forget to do the payment, when you short pay and don't change this, it creates a negative, so it tries to compensate. But this would be the normal way of doing it. SAP is saying, listen, you selected an invoice for $1,623.75, but you're paying $2,000. What am I going to do with that money? So it'll ask if you want to put it on account. If you say yes, it'll actually do it for you down here. You could have done it here yourself, but then you'd have to pull out a calculator and figure it out. Now we do that. So again, we look at the transaction. We can see that we paid here. Again, we paid the invoice in full, and we have this on account. So we actually have an open balance on this transaction. Okay, again, this is paid in full. Well, what we do is we have that journal entry. If we go here to the account balance, you can see right here that SAP created this transaction on the outgoing payment. So it left the amount open, so it's there on an outgoing payment. That doesn't really make sense on, I show it to you because it's part of the system, but you really don't have payment on account. That happens a lot on the incoming payment. When we talk about incoming payment, that happens a lot because a customer sends you a check, and let's say they paid an invoice, but then they pay it again. So you have to record that money. So typically that happens a lot more on the incoming payments, but you can also do it on the outgoing payment. You wouldn't kind of overpay a payment on outgoing, but you can do both. So again, what we're looking at here is paying the different information. So again, we can select several. So if we go here, again, we can easily go here and we can select the ones we want to pay and do it that way. Another function, which is kind of nice, is if you want to have this SAP decide what you're going to pay. This happens to a lot when you're dealing with certain vendors. You're just going to pay some of the older invoices. So what I can do here is I can go to the payment means first. And let's put in, say, see, we got, let's put in $12,000. Put in $10,000. So I'm going to do that, and then I have this thing where it says add in sequence. So if I click this, it's going to look at the oldest invoices first. It's going to actually grab credits if there's any credits here. See these journal entries that are being created here? Okay, so it's going to grab some of these. These journal entries were created on those payments. Again, there's that problem we talked about with that weird transaction that we said only paid $1,000, but the invoice was for the 16, and we didn't do it, so it created that weird negative here. And then this is our $2,000 payment, so it created that. Okay, so we're just going to click Add in Sequence. So you see what it did. It came down here, and it grabbed this one first, okay, because this was that on account. This was that overpayment that we did, the on account. So it's going to grab that. So it's going to take the full amount of that one, and then it's going to start going through and picking the ones here. So you can see it paid all these in full. And then this last invoice that had a balance due of $58.25, it took the $633.75. So you can actually do that like that. Okay? So I can go ahead and I can add that. So again, if I go back and take a look at it, you're going to see again the invoices that it picked up here. And again, if you look here, you have the information and so on. And if we go to the payment means, you can see how we paid it. Okay. So again, let's kind of review that real quick, what we went over in the outgoing payments, so we can see that. So again, I have different types of outgoing payments. I can go here and let's get our first one that we did today. $135, just looking by the day. So again, you can do several ways here. If you want to do a short pay, you need to select the total payment. So this invoice was $39. I asked for a total payment of $5,000. So I would select it that way. I would select my payment means. How am I going to pay it? This one I was going to do a check. And here's the amount of the check. And again, here's your journal transactions, like that. Okay. So let's go to our next one. Okay, so here's one where we did a discount. We put a 10% discount. Okay, so it does the total pay what was left. And again, it tracks everything that way. You can say here is we did a payment on account. All right, and this is the messed up one. If you notice here is that we wanted to do a short pay. We only wanted to pay $1,000. But what we did is we entered $1,000 in our payment means. Remember that. Okay, which was correct, but we never changed this to 1,000. So notice that the payment on account has this negative because SAP compensates with a journal entry because it has to pay this in full since you're saying and paying in full, so it has to apply the $1,600 to the account, but it's only applying $10 to the bank, so it has to create this negative on account. So it's like adding a negative to get it to kind of work. If we look at this one, this would be the normal, this is an on-account payment, which makes sense because we're paying the invoice in full. Okay, we're actually paid $2,000, so we overpaid. So again, it's going to put the on-account in a positive fashion this way. And this was with an add-in sequence. So we added in sequence. So again, what it's going to do is going to create that information. And in the add-in sequence, what you're going to see, it's going to go to any credits or journals first. So it's going to grab that and apply the other ones. There's another process down here where it says created by the wizard. I'm not going to discuss that today. We do have a webinar on our website about that. But the payment wizard is a way to do this from multiple vendors. Okay, we're going to cover that. We have it on our website. We did it in another webinar, which is the payment wizard. The payment wizard is how way most people do a check run. What it does is for me, because you notice this is kind of tedious. If I'm going to do normal checks, let's say it's Friday and I'm going to pay checks and I'm going to do 30 vendors. I don't want to have to select the vendor, put the vendor, select, right-click, payment means, add. Go to the next vendor, select, right-click, payment means, and do that 30 times. The wizard actually does it for us. But we're not going to cover that today. We'll cover it in another one. So the wizard allows us to select multiple vendors, and then just what it'll do is it'll create the 30 outgoing payments right here. Okay. And again, if you want to see it for a customer, we can do it for a customer. So if I select a customer, let's see if I have, find somebody with a credit. Okay. So normally we'd go here to the customer, and here we got a couple credits here. So we can do it, if we wanted to, we can do it this way. Again, the same principle holds true. You can do the payment means. The other one is the account. We'll do one of those. Okay, so here you can put paid to the order of, let's just say, let's put it in Mitchell Consulting Group. All right. And then here you would select a GL account. So here we would just go and let's just say miscellaneous expense. Do something like this. And again, we'll put 500 for the amount. Here, again, you would right-click, go to the payment means, we'll do a check. Right-click here, copy balance due, click OK, and click Add. If we go back and look at it, it has the same effect. You can see the pay to the order of. Again, you can look at the effect in General Ledger. So notice this one, we're not dealing with a customer or a vendor. We're dealing directly with a GL account, so it's in here. Okay? Now, another thing we want to talk about real quick, what SAP does, which is kind of interesting, is when I do those outgoing payments and I set it up, normally the next thing we do would actually go to the document printing and print the checks. But what SAP does is something interesting. In the outgoing payments, it actually creates the check for payment here. All right. So if you look here, you can see that here is the check for payments we did here. Again, you can see there's no check number on them yet. They haven't been printed. Okay, so you have one here for Mitchell Consulting, and there's the Acme, and so on. So you can see these checks. This one here has been printed. See, check 317, that one's already been printed. This one was the one we did today. And again, you can see the AP invoices for the 5. Now, some people like this concept. Again, you would have to control it with authorizations, because what I can do here is that here I can actually change the information here. So if I want to, before I print the check, I want to change pay to the order of, you can do that. We do have a couple clients that do that because what they do is they just have a miscellaneous vendor here, and they have a lot of miscellaneous checks. So what they want to do is they want to go here and just put it to the miscellaneous vendor, but the actual check, they want to change what the check prints. Again, that's something you can do. We don't really recommend it, but some of our people do it because of their legacy systems. They had that like miscellaneous vendor that they can kind of free-form the check. You can do it. Again, you can control this with authorization. So within the authorizations, you would not allow, you wouldn't give people the authorizations to change these checks for payments. But technically, you can do it here in the checks for payment. Again, we have a couple clients that do that, but if you want. So let's go through here, and let's go now into the document printing. And the reason why I showed that checks for payment, because that's what we're going to choose to print. So now we're going to go here to document printing. And again, in SAP, you can determine what document you want to print. So in this case, we have it already predefined for checks for payment. And here we have to be printed. So these are the checks that we haven't printed yet. So if we click OK, and once an exchange rate, again, you can see the information here. Let's see what bank I chose, because I don't think I chose this bank, because I don't remember that many checks, but I could have. So let's go back here to the outgoing payments. We're using Bank of New York as our default bank. Yeah, see the difference here. we'll stick that. Again, you can have multiple house banks. Those other checks were set up for Bank of America. I just noticed that because the reason why it asked me for the exchange rate is because I had a Canadian vendor in there. I'm going to do a check in Canadian dollars. Let's go back and take Bank of New York. Okay, so you can see all the checks. We're just going to deal with, let's uncheck these. I'm just going to deal with these two. Normally you should print all these again. Another thing that we recommend is here we have these dates. I always like to leave these blank because if I put, let's say, this, and this has happened to some of our clients, see, they only see the checks that were done today, and those other checks never got printed, and it creates a problem, because they do the check and they never actually printed the check for whatever reason. Because again, if you blank these dates out, so you have all these checks that you've never printed. Okay, but I'm just going to select the ones we did today. Here's our next check number, and the system keeps track inside the system, but I can change this. Let's say the next check was 156, but somebody took that with them because they're handwriting the check. So I'm going to take 157. So I can change this information. What I would do is I would actually select the print. Let's see if I have a printer set up here. So what it's telling me here is just make sure that you've got the check, the checks in the printer. You're starting with 157. You click here. And what it's going to do, it's going to print the checks. All right. Then you're going to get this information here, this check number confirmation. Okay, so we have a couple things in a check number confirmation. And this is kind of the final step. So we printed these checks. And then what we can do here is we have an option. We can leave them unconfirmed like they are now, and we can come back to them later and confirm them. Maybe this is because the confirming is the posting. I printed them, but I want to wait, for the accountant to come back to sign off before I post them. Again, if you confirm them, they're posted, so they're good to go, and you can't make any changes to them. You'd have to void them. You have two options for reprinting. You can select damaged and not printed. The difference being if you select damage, you cannot use that check number again. If you select not printed, you can use the check number again. So when would that come into play? Okay, I put the checks in printer number 1, and when I went to print, I selected printer number 2. So the check's printed on blank paper. So my check stock or my checks are still good. I would select not printed here. Let's just take this last one. I would do not printed, and you can see I can use check 160 again and reprint again. If I made a mistake, for example, I put the check paper and the check stock upside down, and I wasted it, then I would select damage because it's like voiding a check. Check 157 and so on were actually damaged, so I can do damaged like that. And I would actually go in and check the checks from damage. I'm going to leave these as unconfirmed. You can also go here and do it globally. I'm going to leave everything as unconfirmed. And I'm going to click Update. Oh, and one sec. I took out that check number. Okay. So now, if I go back, which is checks to be printed, you're not going to see the ones from today. You see these old ones. And you can see how the numbers kind of sequence. The reason why I did that is because what I can do now is I can wait. If I look at the checks for payment now, okay, you can see the check numbers are here. See here, 161, and this is 159. They're actually set, the form I'm using overflows. That's why it has that overflow. That's another option you can do when you actually set up the type of check you want. You can do one of two things. You have the option of printing on an additional piece of paper or overflowing. What that means is that typically, like let's say your accounts payable check can hold 12 invoices on the stub. So if I'm paying 15 invoices, what I can do, I can use the first check, print the 12 on the stub, and then go to the second check as an overflow, and just use up the stub and void the check. That's what that overflow is. Or I can say, no, I don't want to do that. I just want to print the check, and then what it'll do is in the stub, it'll say, whatever, see attached. And then behind it, I would print on white paper all the invoices that are being done. Again, it depends on your type of business. A lot of people, usually when they print checks, they're paying 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 invoices, so they don't really overflow the checks. Maybe every now and then they would overflow a check, so they do it that way. For people who pay, several invoices, 50, 60 invoices each time, you don't want to overflow all your checks, so you want to just print on the stub, see attachment, and then the attached overflow will print on white paper. So you can do it that way. So again, you can see that information here. All right. So now, remember, since I went to my document printing, I printed them, but I left them as unconfirmed. What I can do now is I can go to check number confirmation, and here I can kind of pick up the process. See, here they are. At the right bank. No, got to go to Bank of New York. And in Bank of New York, see here, see that overflow? So what I can do now is, again, I can change, everything's fine. I can change the status to confirmed. Now when I update, that's it. Now they're posted, so they're in the system. So now, again, if you go back and look at the outgoing payments, you can see we've now updated everything. Remember before when we went into here and we right-clicked and look at the payment means, this was blank. See, now it's here. Okay? So you can see it's here. And the one that was manual won't show here, so that one's actually in the system. All right? And again, I'll just show you real quick. If you made a mistake and you want to void, you can go here to void checks. You got to be very careful in here because you got to make sure you don't want to void all your checks. Again, you can go to our bank code. Let's just grab Bank of America. Nope, Bank of New York I'm using. Again, this one here, now, again, you can see the vendor. So if I select this one for void, again, here's the check we see. There's the outgoing payments. What it'll do is it'll actually open this up and put it back in the system. So I'm going to avoid that one. Be very careful because people select too many of them. There's also an option down here. You can use the cancellation date or the check's posting date. The cancellation date would actually post the cancellation or the void of the check today or the day I'm voiding it. The check posting date will go back in time. So if this check was written 6 months ago, okay, and you want to void it for whatever reason, to stop payment, it got lost, I wouldn't go back to the posting date because then it's going to go back and make a journal entry 6 months from now, and those financials could have already been, already been processed and so on. So the cancellation date will just post it on today's date. And I've actually had that happen to a client who called one day, and they said, I don't understand. I see all these invoices here from last year, and I don't know why they're here. And that's what they did. They had all these old stuff that when they voided it, they selected this date here instead of the cancellation date, which would be the date of the void, which in this case would be today's date, the 22nd. Again, it's just going to ask you, you want to void that check? And it's going to show here. Okay, so now if you look at that check, you can see in the journal remark the check is canceled. And that document, you see that invoice 187. If we go here, let's double click on this. If we look at 187, you can see now that's going to be reopened. See, it's open again. I can also right-click and look at the applied transactions and follow the logic. You can see here that there's that payment of the 5 here, and then see the reversal. These two cancel each other out, so you can actually do it that way. Okay, so that kind of concludes our little session today. Again, to recap what we talked about, we went into banking in SAP Business One, and we talked about outgoing payments. We can see that outgoing payments, what we learned today is that we can do outgoing payments for vendors or customers or directly to a GL account. When we do those, we have what we call our payment means. We have 4 payment means. These are how we pay. We can do checks, bank transfers, credit cards, and cash. And again, this holds true for the incoming payments as well. We can select that. Here, if we click this little button, we can then override and type our check number. This means it's a manual check. It's a check that I hand wrote, so it's not going to show up in any of the check printing. So when I print checks, it won't even show up. It's in the system. We know that we can do a few things with here. We can pay an invoice in full by putting the amount here. We can put a partial pay, so if we have an invoice, let's call this up. So again, you can see here how we have that. And you can see that invoice got opened back up again, 187. So if we want to pay $2,000, we can put what we want to pay. We can select multiples here, or we can actually add discounts. We can do either a discount percent, okay, like that, take 10%, or we can go here and say a discount of $1 and do it that way. We can do all those. We can also do payments on account. So if we pay more than what's here, in this case, we can just easily right-click and copy balance due. But if we put $5,000 and we take out the charge, what it'll do, it'll prompt you for payment on account. We can do it that way. Or we can just do the payment on account right here. Sometimes, again, it doesn't really make sense on those payments on account on the outgoing side, but they're there if you want them to be there. We can also do the add-in sequence, which means what we could do here is we don't want to pick the invoices here. We want SAP to pick them. So what we can do is we can go to the payment means first. Change this to put 6,000. Click OK, and then do an add-in sequence. And see what it'll do here. It'll pay this one, and then of this one of the 5,000, it'll do it that way. So you can actually do it that way. And again, you know about the payment means here. Once you do this, again, what SAP does is that it creates the check for payment first. You can see it here without a check number. Technically, if you want, you can edit the pay to the order of. Again, we don't recommend doing that. We do have a couple clients that do that because they have a miscellaneous vendor for everything. Again, this is also controlled with authorization. So if you're not authorized to make any changes to this check for payment, you can't make any changes to it. Okay, see here, and so on. All right, we do that, and then once we do that, we actually go into printing. And we can go here into printing in the document printing. So we can go here, again, checks to be printed. So we can see right here and do it this way. There's another option you can do here, which I tell people to be very careful of, is reissuing. Okay, we talked about, and this is going to be the last thing we're talking about today on the reissuing part, but you got to be very careful on that. Let's say you do a check, and then the check is wrong, so you want to avoid it. So if you go here into the outgoing payments, and we saw where we void checks for payment. Okay, so we select this. What this is going to do, it's going to void the check and put the invoices back into the aging. All right, so we can select them for a future payment. That would make sense if, let's say you paid 5 invoices. You selected 5 invoices check, and then I realized, no, I'm only going to pay 4. So I would void the check, as we saw here. So we would click void. You want to void yes. We go through this process, and now that check is voided, and those invoices are in the system to be paid at a future date. Sometimes I may just want to reissue a check. So, for example, I sent a check to the vendor, and the vendor never got the check. It got lost in the mail, whatever. I said, okay, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to put a stop payment on that check. I'm going to reissue you another check. I don't need to really void per se, because why put all the invoices back in the aging and reselect the invoices? Because I'm not changing what I'm paying. I want to do the same thing. So what I can do here is in the document printing, I can select for reissue. Here I got to be careful because, and I've had clients do this, they don't pay attention because see what it does, they come in all checked. And I had a client reissue every one of their checks. So all this is saying is that this check that was 161, I'm just going to reprint it. So what I'm going to do is I'm not going to touch it. I'm just going to say 161 got lost in the mail. I'm just going to go here. And again, if we look at the internal ID 85, you can see it was 161. I'm just going to click print. It's going to go through the process again. See here. And I'm going to confirm it. Okay, so now what I did is I reissued that check. If I click here, there's nothing. You'll see it right here. And see the historical check went from 161 to 162. So if we look here, we've done that. Check 161 was voided. So we can have the option of doing that information here if you want. So if we go here and look at the bank reports in the check register for today, let's look at all checks. You can see here 161. See it says damaged. Let's expand this. You can see everything. See 161 got damaged, so what happens is it got replaced with 162. This one was voided. Okay? Again, I could do either way, but the reissuing doesn't put the transactions back into the aging and let you reselect. It just replaces the check. So that would be like a check that's lost in the mail or something like that, and you just want to reissue a new check. Again, but be very careful when you do that because you have to make sure you select a specific check. Okay, so that concludes our webinar today. Like we said, this is being recorded. This will be available on our website. You can visit us at www.mitchellgroup.com to view this as well as the others in our training series.